Could we see a major trade between the Miami Dolphins and San Francisco 49ers revolving edge rusher Jaelan Phillips? Well, earlier this week, it was announced that Nick Bosa will miss the rest of the season with a torn ACL. He suffered that injury in week 3 as the 49ers defeated the Arizona Cardinals. But the Niners obviously would have probably rather lost the game and kept Bosa for the rest of the year. But he suffers a torn ACL. It's allegedly a clean tear, according to Adam Schefter. And the real disheartening news, if you're a Niners fan or someone who enjoys watching Nick Bosa play football, that ACL tear was in the exact same knee that he suffered a torn ACL about 3 or 4 years ago. So 2 ACL tears in the same knee. That could mean his career is certainly in jeopardy. But the Niners, through 3 weeks of the season, are one of the rare teams that are 3-0. They are undefeated, defeating the Seahawks, beating the Cardinals and Saints. So they're already 2-0 inside the division, one of the 6 or 7 teams 3-0. And with their pass rush taking a massive hit by losing Nick Bosa for the rest of the year, you'd have to imagine they may get aggressive on the trade market looking for an edge rusher, and I think Jaelan Phillips would be someone they would be interested in. More to come, but hey, if the Dolphins do ever make a trade before the deadline on November 4th, we will break the news on Twitter before we make a video about it. So go give us a follow right now, 39 followers away from 2,400, at Nic_Rohloff's the handle. You look at the 49ers defensive line and pass rush here, and Bosa obviously is banged up. They drafted Mykel Williams out of Georgia in the first round, but they made a lot of investments on the interior defensive line. They drafted Alfred Collins from Texas this year, CJ West from Indiana. They brought in Yetur Gross-Matos, a former Day 2 selection. And they actually did make a trade in June with the Eagles for Bryce Huff, who has been phenomenal for the 49ers through the first 3 weeks. Actually, one of the top 10 highest graded pass rushers at the edge position in the entire NFL. But with Bosa out for the year, they need another guy. There is no way a 49ers fan, or really anybody in the media, could seriously sit up here and believe a pass rush edge duo of Mykel Williams and Bryce Huff is good enough to get the job done in the postseason when you have to go up against the likes of Jalen Hurts and that Eagles offensive line, Matthew Stafford and the Rams, the Buccaneers with that elite offensive line and passing attack with Baker Mayfield. If the 49ers want to compete this year, which you'd have to imagine they do, considering the hot start they've got up to, without Brandon Ayuk, without George Kittle the last couple of weeks, without Brock Purdy the past 2 weeks. I mean, this is a team suffering multiple injuries to high-level veterans on the offensive side of the field, and they're still winning games. So I don't think they're going to sit idly by as they lose their best defensive player for the rest of the season. And I think the NFC West being that difficult, where you have 3 teams that are 2-1, a 3-0 squad in San Francisco, the Niners can't just sit by and hope they can survive without Nick Bosa, without George Kittle, without Brandon Ayuk. No, I imagine they get aggressive sooner rather than later to try to add talent to that defense, specifically at the edge department with the Nick Bosa injury. And let's face it, the Miami Dolphins are the perfect trade partner for the San Francisco 49ers. Miami has 3 veteran edge rushers that you cannot guarantee will be on this roster a year from now in Jaelan Phillips, Bradley Chubb, and Matthew Judon. You would have to imagine San Francisco, as long as Miami continues to struggle and lose games, calls up Chris Grier and the Dolphins, trying to see what it would cost to pry one of those 3 veteran pass rushers away so they can join San Francisco in that pass rush featuring Mykel Williams and Bryce Huff. So before I get into more around Jaelan Phillips, who is the most likely player to be traded away from the Dolphins at that edge position? Is it Jaelan Phillips type JP, Bradley Chubb type BC, or MJ type Matthew Judon? I think without a question, Jaelan Phillips and Bradley Chubb would probably garner the most interest from opposing teams. I wouldn't be shocked if Judon had intrigue for like a 7th round pick or a pick swap, but he was a free agent late into the year and he hasn't done anything to start this season, so I can't fathom a lot of interest there. But Chubb and Phillips, two of the better veterans in the league. Chubb has 3 sacks. Phillips has a lot of good metrics. Yeah, those two could be interesting. And if you're the Miami Dolphins, I think you have to consider trading Jaelan Phillips if this struggle before the trade deadline continues. Jaelan Phillips has 1 year left on his rookie contract. He is currently playing on that final 5th-year option for Miami. And there is no guarantee that he will be extended by the Dolphins, especially if you see a whole new regime following the season, which you would expect if Miami struggles. You'll have a new GM and a new head coach this time next year. So those guys aren't the same regime that drafted Jaelan Phillips, invested into the time of the Miami edge rusher. So you could absolutely see him not being brought back in free agency. So if you are thinking of maybe that being a possibility, you should absolutely trade him now. And Phillips will have value through 3 weeks of the NFL season. He actually has been statistically the best pass rusher on the Dolphins. I know Bradley Chubb has the most sacks with 3, but if you take away that number and just look at the win percentage on pass rushes, the pressures forced, the pass rush grade by PFF, he is without a question the best one. And he's actually in the top 20, 30% of all edge rushers in the NFL. If you look at the top pass rusher and his snaps and just qualify people to have 20% or more of the top snaps, there's 116. Well, you see the ranks for Jaelan Phillips. He's been really good. And yes, he has not been getting the sacks. He has not been finishing the plays like Bradley Chubb. But you can actually credit half the sacks from this Dolphins football team, it feels like, to Jaelan Phillips, beating his man around the edge, forcing the quarterback to step up or scramble a little bit earlier than he would like, to where Jaelan Phillips or Chop Robinson is sitting there waiting to get it done. He is without a question the most consistent pass rusher to this point in the season for the Miami Dolphins, and they should look to capitalize on a potential trade if teams come calling. Looking at his potential trade value here in a second, but we are sponsored by Omaha Steaks. And are you on the lookout for convenient weeknight meals? Well, look no further than Omaha Steaks. I love cooking, but it's difficult with the craziness that is the Dolphins. But with handcrafted steaks to delicious fall favorites, Omaha Steaks delivers the world's best steak experience. And now, during their Red Hot Sale event, you can get 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. But you can also get an extra $35 off with promo code NFL Daily at checkout. Heartland quality food delivered right to your door. Every steak is perfectly aged to maximize tenderness and hand cut by master butchers in America's heartland. Grass-fed, grain-finished beef has more marbling for exceptional flavor and is the choice of steakhouses and professional chefs around the world. They also carry mouth-watering burgers, chicken, pork, seafood, and delectable desserts. Get fired up for fall grilling with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide during the Red Hot Sale event. But remember, an extra $35 off when you use promo code NFL Daily at checkout. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $35 off with promo code NFL Daily at checkout. See site for details. I think it's been abundantly clear in this video to this point, but I would be more than willing to trade Jaelan Phillips if a team came calling with a good enough trade package at the deadline, or honestly right now, because I don't think he's going to be back here long term. And if he is, I can't imagine it being a massive 4-year deal. It would likely be a 1-year deal or a 2-year contract, because you can't just commit that much money and years on a contract to a guy that has suffered both a torn Achilles and torn ACL in 2 of the last 3 seasons. So I think the Dolphins could look to trade him, but I still think the value is not so bad to where you're not getting anything in return for Phillips. I don't think you're going to get a day 2 pick for him due to the injury history as well as the 1 year left on his deal. But a conditional 4th round pick makes a ton of sense for both sides. The 49ers can buy low on Phillips for the rest of the season. And if it works out for San Francisco, he balls out in that Robert Salah scheme and maybe they extend him. Maybe that draft selection gets elevated from a 4th round pick to a 3rd round selection and Miami gets another day 2 pick. I think that would make sense for both teams, especially for a team in San Francisco that is likely going to try to buy at the deadline so they can compete in the NFC. Now, I will say this, a trade for Phillips I think would be closer to the deadline, although I could see San Francisco getting aggressive now with the Bosa injury, not wanting to waste any time. But if you're Miami, maybe you do want to wait to see if you make a trade closer to that November 4th deadline because you want to see how the next month goes. Listen, I don't expect it, but there is a realistic world we live in where the Dolphins go 4-1 over their next 5 games because they play the Jets, they play the Panthers, they play the Browns, they play the Falcons. Like, they have 6 games before the deadline. The other 2, Chargers and Ravens. They go 4-2 in those games. They're 4-5 heading into the deadline, and you can talk yourself into maybe holding on to some pieces because you can make a push for a wild card spot. Do I expect that? No, they'll probably go 3 and they'll probably be 3-6 at the deadline, in my opinion. They'll go 3-3 over their next 6, and then if you're 3-6 at the deadline, yeah, then you're absolutely selling. But the point is, you're probably going to have to wait and see what happens over the next month. And we'll be here every step of the way with trade rumors, watch parties, news, and everything in between. So subscribe to Miami Dolphins Today. Join the family for daily Dolphins coverage, 2 videos a day, 3 live shows a week. What else do you need? I do want to point out, though, I would keep an eye for Bradley Chubb potentially being in a trade this November or October, as well as Jaelan Phillips, because Chubb makes more sense if you're going to trade him because, one, he's older and not a part of the long-term plans of this organization, but that also means he's probably not going to fetch you as good as a return as Jaelan Phillips, to where I think you could get a conditional 4th, and maybe if a team gets really desperate and Phillips continues to play well over the next month, a straight-up 3rd-round pick. Because when you look at Bradley Chubb's numbers, yes, he has 3 sacks, which is 7th highest in the NFL amongst edge rushers. His advanced numbers are not good whatsoever. It's crazy that he has 3 sacks on only 4 pressures. That just means he's very lucky in the pressures that he's been able to force where he actually finishes the play. But Jaelan Phillips, we already showed the graphic earlier, has 9 pressures. He's doubled up Bradley Chubb. And he's 95th graded at 116 and a pass win percentage of 102 out of the 116. So he has not been really that good despite the 3 sacks. Don't let those sacks fool you. Yeah, Bradley Chubb has finished a couple plays here, but he hasn't been consistently creating havoc for the quarterbacks. And if we're going to be real, this entire Dolphins edge group and pass rush hasn't been that good through 3 games, but Jaelan Phillips is definitely the best out of the bunch. I will mention Chubb will definitely still have trade value. Like, I'm not trying to discredit him and saying that him being worse than Phillips this year, despite having the 3 sacks, means he's not going to have solid trade value. No, he will. And there is 2 ways you can look at this as well. You can look at the Bradley Chubb and say, like, okay, he's a veteran that has multi-years left on his deal. Maybe it would be worth trading for him because we could have him for longer than this season. But you can also say, this contract gets a little bit dicey should the other team want to trade for him. Well, let's look at Chubb's contract here because he does have 2 years left on his deal. Remember, he signed a massive extension with Miami a couple years ago, and then they revised his contract this offseason before 2025 to lower his cap hit. But over the next 2 seasons, he has a base of 19.4 and 18.4, and then a cap hit of 31.2 and 31.5. But that number should not scare you because you can get out of the deal anytime you want. Now, it would make sense to do a post-June 1st release over the next couple of years, but you can choose what you want to do with whatever team it is. This offseason, if you release Bradley Chubb after the year, you have a $23.8 million dead cap, but you save $7.3 million. If you waited till after June 1st, you would save $20 million in cap space with only a dead cap hit of 10.9. The numbers obviously go more in your favor if you keep them for 2026, although it would be on a $31 million cap hit, and then just ultimately release him following the 2026 season before the final year of his contract, because you would save $18.6 million and only take on a $12.8 million dead cap. The point I'm trying to make here in showing the contract, showing the outs after and before June 1st, is that Miami is likely moving on from Chubb following this year. Because, one, the advanced metrics early on the season have not been kind to Bradley Chubb, but also this team needs to get even more young. And with a new regime, I'm going to continue to point this out, that is expected to have a new GM and a new head coach, these players that have been on the roster and were handpicked by Mike McDaniel, handpicked by Chris Greer in the draft, in free agency, via the trade market, there is more of a likelihood they just flat out get cut, they get traded as well, because you're going to want that new regime to bring in their type of guys who know their style and they believe fit their system. So why not trade him now to recoup a day 3 pick? And I know if you don't fire Chris Greer before the deadline, he's making these decisions. So it's going to be under the assumption he's back the next year. But that's also me coming here and saying, if I was GM, this is what I would be doing. I think Bradley Chubb's trade value is probably around a 5th-round pick because he does have a couple years left on his deal. He's had 3 sacks this season. Could you tell me it's a 6th-round pick? Sure. Could you tell me it's even a pick swap where you trade Chubb in a 7th to get a 6th-round pick? Yeah, I could. I think it could range anywhere between a 5th, 6th, or 7th-round pick, but I like to be optimistic and think it's going to be closer to that 5th-round value. That'll do it for today's show. Appreciate everybody for tuning in and watching this episode of Dolphins Today. If you want more coverage on the Miami Dolphins every single day, 2 videos a day, and 3 live shows a week, this is the channel for you. Hit that red sub button.